told Sandy the only problem with that song, I'm going to have to pull myself off the ground afterward. We're getting ready to say goodbye. And last week I ended the sermon talking about this question that's been on my heart of, as you, in your blessing of me and of our time together, tell me what big shoes they will be leaving to fill, what a hard act to follow. My question back to you of what is it that you have done to make that true, and what is it that you will need to do in relationship with your next minister to make sure you're saying the same thing about them when in many years, many years, this moment comes again. We're looking at a shift not just between ministries, but between kinds of ministry. This developmental ministry has been a particular kind of beast. It's been a different shape and structure and form than a settled ministry, which you are discerning your way into, which you are contemplating entering into with Corey. And we have done a lot in this 5 years. We've been moving at the pace of a developmental ministry with a pandemic thrown in. We'll get to that. But I've been thinking about this Henry shift from 2 to 7, but you can think about it when you look back in that big leap from one to another, but during the time, you don't notice all that growing happening, right? It doesn't usually happen, our changes, our growth, in big leaps. It happens in little incremental steps, more like the many marks, because he wants to do it all the time. I have to say no most of the time, the marks on the door frame. You know what I'm talking about, where you put the envelope and make a little height mark, and you can see that progress over time. But they're not, well, except for those, year that we forget to do it, and then there's a jump. But they're little incremental steps. This principle of incrementality, it was one that was a key learning from one of my teachers, Phil Porter, about how change works. I'm the kind of person who's always looking for that next big leap. You might have noticed this about me. I like to jump in, but the wisdom is, and some people have this as more intuitively their nature, is that change most of the time actually happens in these little incremental steps. We get into trouble in many little steps. We have to get ourselves out of trouble in many little steps. Or like the rainbow that we've been talking about, and the science of the rainbow we were talking about last week. It's not so much one leap from a color to the next, but that gradual gradation. There's no exact point where red becomes orange, where orange becomes yellow. It's an ombre all the way through. We hit the ground running with these 5 developmental goals. Remember that first year, before we had any clue that we'd be hopping onto Zoom all the time, that first year that we met in small groups throughout the year, talking about your hopes and histories, and talking about specifically the mission of this place. What is it about? And by the end of a year, in that charging forward way, we developed, wrote, and unanimously approved a new mission statement that has been, I think, the heart of our work ever since, has guided and directed all that I've done with you. So we've taken these incremental steps, but sometimes we've taken them a little more quickly than others. There was that moment of leaping when a gift was given to refurbish the deck, what I see as the first big leap in this much longer process we're now engaged in of caring for reimagining this space. And yesterday at that wonderful celebration, it was one of the big attractions I saw of people coming to our space for the first time, just drifting naturally out to the edge of the deck to enjoy this incredible place that we've inherited. We've taken little organizational steps that felt like big leaps at the time, sometimes bylaw revisions, and I'm sure some of you made more racy charts than you ever wanted to think about. Clarifying, it's important, these little incremental steps clarifying who's responsible for what, who has authority to do what. Personnel changes, we've turned over almost the entire staff team at this point through this developmental ministry. We developed a vision for what you would imagine that mission could lead to over the next 10, 20 years, a vision that led to claiming this place, to deciding we're not going to continue down the road of fantasies about moving off the hill, being somewhere else. We're going to invest here. We're going to plant here for the next 70 years. Which, of course, led to this moment of capital campaign, all the little incremental steps that went into it, and then all the many more yet to come. And sometimes, as we take little step by little step, there are speed bumps that we need to get over. And that was true for this pandemic speed bump. It was maybe not just a little speed bump, it was a big speed bump. We pivoted to Zoom. I remember not missing a Sunday and just being amazed at you all, especially you in your 80s and 90s, learning how to get on Zoom at the drop of a hat. We got over quite a speed bump together. And right around then, I was getting over my own speed bump, and my own speed bump of divorce, and in particular, the speed bump that presented in my journey as a parent. Because all of a sudden, this was one of the hardest losses, the hardest costs of that important change in my life, was that I didn't see my son every day. And to go suddenly from a constant witnessing of those incremental daily steps to missing half of his life felt like a blow I couldn't possibly live through. And what it turned out to be as I grieved and integrated the moment was the truth that we are not our children. Our children are not our children, as Khalil Gibran put it. They're the sons and the daughters of life's longing for itself, this truth that children grow up and go away and live their own lives, and we see less and less of them. It just happened a little fast and early, and yet there was a gift in that truth. A knowing that his life was his own. And an ability that I gained through it to be present to him in a different way. And through that to be present in my roles and relationships, including as a minister with you, in a different way. Your congregation is not your congregation. Is the life's longing for itself. And so we've taken these many incremental steps, a few leaps over speed bumps here and there, but all in this context, this charge of 5 goals over 5 years. Knowing our time together was bound to 5 years, it painted my work with you with brushstrokes of both urgency and liberation. If you've ever had a job where you're pre-fired when you start, you know the liberation part that I'm talking about. And what a gift. I was talking a lot about that last week, so I won't go more into it, but what a gift it's been for you to love me as your minister in that context, to get to minister to you with that liberation and also that urgency. When I went to a training at the very beginning of working with you for transitional ministries, that was what the professional interims called it, being a faster pastor. You do all the same things that another minister might do, but you have to do them all in a condensed way. And she was talking about interims that can be as short as a year or 2 years, but 5 years still. We've done a whole arc of our relationship in a less than organic way. This goodbye, we've turned it into a structure that is not how things would naturally unfold in our relationship, but for the intentions we set from the beginning. And you are on the brink of a new relationship now, a new kind of relationship, one in which you might explore that or more organic unfolding, to build a ministry together, a shared ministry that is rooted in a different pace. And I would hope that for you. And I know that this moment coming right on up where I'm going to leave one Sunday and then you're going to be asked to get excited about a new relationship the next, it's not an easy moment. Grief and new beginning all at once. It's not an easy moment, and yet we know we can do hard things. I know you can do hard things. You can hold grief and excitement together. You can be brokenhearted and open your heart all at once. I know you can do hard things. And you've got another bar to clear. It's not just that moment, but there has been, of course, a history here. We've talked about this plenty. A history of hard endings, hard relationships with your settled ministers. Oh, yes. I've heard you over and over tell me how much you've loved those interim ministers. Oh, those pre-fired ministers, aren't they great? I can put up with anything for 2 years, even 5 years. You can put up with whatever crazy thing Marcus and I want to do, but indefinite, long-term, asks of you a different kind of relationship, a different kind of trust, not just in your minister, but in your own capacity for being in a conversation with your minister. There are benefits to short-term ministry. We've experienced a lot of them, but there are also costs. There are big projects and visions. There's ways of integrating life into the wider community. There are ways of relating pastorally that don't happen in a short-term ministry, even 5 years, that only are possible from this longer-term relationship. I wish it for you. Something you should know, given all of this history and given the moment we are in, Reverend Keith Cron, our director of transitions, who is, hears all the stories, knows all the congregations and the ministers, trying to help people find each other and make a way in these crazy times. He's recently let us all know that 40% of the Unitarian Universalist congregations looking for an interim minister did not get one this year. That, he said, is a bellwether moment. This is new. We are experiencing the way in which so many things, a transition, a trend that has been happening for a long time, was made acute by the pandemic. And so not only 40% of congregations not getting an interim, but 4 large congregations, 250 to 400 members, mid-sized, large congregations, didn't get interim ministers. This has never happened before. 4 out of 16 people who saw the Ministerial Fellowship Committee, which is a much smaller cohort than in years past, but 16 people saw the Ministerial Fellowship Committee this past year. 4 of them wanted to do this work of parish ministry. Just 4. If our liberal religious tradition is to survive, to pass down the gifts that we've received to another generation, it's not going to do so from ministers coming in and saving the day. It's going to come from rich and sustaining relationships, from congregations and ministers who practice love together, who work at how to live lives of joy and justice together, who keep a seat open at the table to keep welcoming one more seeker, one more broken-hearted griever, one more dedicated justice maker to the community. It will be through relationships grounded in love that we continue this tradition. And because I find myself in a rarer and rarer group of people, I am so grateful for the way in which you have affirmed and deepened my call to ministry. As I serve and continue in this work across the bay in Berkeley, I will think of you often, but I will not visit you. And I won't talk to you about church. I won't ignore you if I see you. Our relationships are real. But I won't talk to you about your spiritual life or community. If you come visit over at Berkeley, I know some people will, I'll say hi, and if you ask me questions, I'll direct you back to your minister here, and I'll let you know, I'm going to let him know you came by. But we will stay connected over the years, but I won't be your minister any longer. And the question that you will continue to live, the question that we've asked together and lived together, is how to be good to a minister without feeling responsible for caretaking your minister. And a little wisdom on that front from a favorite poet, Naomi Shihab Nye. She's a Palestinian-American poet, and this is a poem I shared with you one of the first couple Sundays I was here. She says, "Red brocade. The Arabs used to say, when a stranger appears at your door, feed him for 3 days before asking who he is, where he's come from, where he's headed. That way, he'll have strength enough to answer. Or by then, you'll be such good friends, you don't care. Let's go back to that. Rice, pine nuts. Here, take the red brocade pillow. My child will serve water to your horse. No, I was not busy when you came. I was not preparing to be busy." That's the armor everyone put on to pretend they had a purpose in the world. I refuse to be claimed. Your plate is waiting. We will snip fresh mint into your tea. There are some conversations that it takes 3 days to have, and others perhaps a decade or more, talking about stories from our childhood with my brother 3 years ago when we reconnected. There were stories that we had never told one another, stories it took us decades to be ready to tell. Or when I was contemplating moving in together with Caitlin, knowing that would put us on this trajectory towards marriage and all its conundrums, all its joys. I bought these cards, these 52 cards from the Gottman Institute of conversations to have before marrying or moving in with a partner. And I just started pulling out, okay, we're going to talk about this. And then, oh boy, she put an end to that quick. These conversations that need to happen organically. And candidating week, it's a bit like those Gottman cards. It's a necessary step in an inorganic step in what ultimately I hope is a much more organic process. Long-term, open-ended ministry, I think it makes that different something possible. Reading the history of the Oakland church where I grew up, I noticed these moments where minister has been there for decades, and through their cultivation of a community ethos, whether it's about the transcendentalist message of God in nature or the value of world community, it results in members going and preserving the East Bay parkland or starting the United Nations UNESCO wing in the church building. These momentous gifts that come from long-term work of relationship together. I'm not sure exactly what goes into the alchemy of making a good minister. A good seminary education is certainly helpful. And all the skills that we spent the last fall talking about, the skills of shared ministry, of listening and counseling, of artistry and scholarship, all of them, they help. And then there's that intimate work that might happen in seminary, but certainly other places too, of integrating the painful and disconnected parts of oneself and one's story. There's organizing a hopefully healthy relationship to power and authority. There's the unique and elusive to define quality we call charisma, which etymologically, it's from the Greek charism, which is this idea of just connection to the divine, of the gift of grace. Whatever it is that is the unique soul inheritance that makes someone able to share their own gift of grace in a generous way with others. I'm not sure exactly how all these things might combine in some mysterious way to make a good minister, but I do know what makes a great minister, what makes a ministry great, is the quality of relationship with the people that they serve. A community living its values, a dedicated and passionate congregation, a people invested in their mission, in their ministry, that's what makes a good minister great. May you ever find good ministers to serve you. May you ever endeavor to make their ministry with you great. May you serve a holy mission together under a rainbow sign, co-creating a future made beautiful by you seeing one another, one blessed hue after the next. May it be so. I love you, and amen.